The creation narrative in Genesis and Plato. Genesis introduces a creator who initiates existence through sheer linguistic command. Let there be. This establishes a metaphysical break with ancient cosmogonies. Being is not the result of violence, sexual generation, or a primordial struggle between divine forces, but emerges from the sovereign will of a single transcendent source. The Creator stands ontologically prior to creation, a principle that grounds Western philosophical cosmology's concept of contingent existence. Creation is not a necessary emanation, but a free act. The philosophical implications are foundational. Matter is not eternal, and the cosmos is not divine. Instead, it is orderly, rational, and receptive to intellectual inquiry, conditions upon which natural philosophy and modern science depend. The narrative establishes an intelligible cosmos governed by speech acts, analogous to rational principles. Thus, cosmology becomes a branch of metaphysics. Studying the world entails studying how rational order descends from divine reason. Creatio ex nihilo. Two complementary cosmological readings emerge. Creatio ex nihilo and cosmos from chaos. The first emphasizes being from no substrate, a radical ontological claim. Prior to divine action, there was no something. The second frames creation as imposition of form upon formlessness, echoing Aristotelian metaphysics, where form actualizes matter's potential. Genesis's phrase, without form or void, implies an orientation toward order. Philosophically, both are necessary. Ex nihilo affirms God as absolute first cause, while ordering chaos affirms God as final and formal cause. This pair perfectly with the four causal metaphysical system. Creation, in this sense, is not simply temporal origin. It is the continued ontological grounding of every contingent being. Cosmology, therefore, is not or studies not only the beginning, but the persistent participation of creatures in divine intelligibility. Let's look at the creation story. Genesis 1 to 2 4a. Genesis 1 structures creation by separating and thus defining realms. Separation is a metaphysical movement from indistinction to identity. As categories emerge, so do the intelligible principles by which beings are knowable. The cosmos is not random aggregation, but organized differentiation, revealing logos embedded in existence. In philosophical cosmology, separations correspond to ontological boundaries, the principles of species, stability, and natural law. Each domain possesses internal teleology, allowing beings to flourish according to form. Let them be becomes a declaration of natural kinds. Later affirmed by classical philosophy, the universe is a harmony of ordered relations, making rational cosmology very possible. But we also need to see that things that it was good. Creation's goodness is an ontological value judgment. Good here refers to functional perfection, that which achieves its natural ends. This implies a teleological cosmos. Every being has a purpose in the whole. Goodness is not added from outside, it is inherent in properly ordered existence. This thesis stands against dualistic cosmologies where matter is understood as evil or corrupted. Instead, materiality is affirmed as a medium of divine wisdom. The Sabbath, rest, signals a metaphysical completion. The cosmos sustains itself, expressing secondary causality, a key topic in philosophical teleology. The world is granted genuine participation in causation, not mere puppetry. In the Genesis text, we see how humanity is the crown of creation. Humans possess a unique metaphysical constitution, dust and breath. This unites material finitude with spiritual intellect. The image and likeness doctrine grounds rationality, moral freedom, and relationality. Humanity, therefore, becomes an intermediary being, reading creation's meaning and returning praise through knowledge and cultivation. This anthropological structure makes humans cosmologists, capable of discerning universal order and even governing responsibly. Being in the world includes scientific inquiry as the fulfillment of the Imago Dei. Dominion here is to be understood as philosophical stewardship. The human vocation is to interpret and even perfect creation's potential. Here we see creation in historical context. Cosmology is shaped by worldview and historical experience. Israel's creation theology emerges from agricultural life and from the trauma of empire, particularly the Babylonian exile. The priestly editor asserts political powers do not define reality, God does. Thus, cosmology is anti imperial philosophy, dethroning mythic kingship of nature or state. Israel's God rules history. Therefore, reality is intelligible and morally purposive. Creation is the first articulation of freedom, setting the trajectory for future liberation. Metaphysics and ethics, therefore, remain inseparable. Here we see the role of the agricultural paradise. Eden represents ordered ecology, a philosophical image of harmonious human nature relations. Agriculture becomes a paradigm of humanity's role, transforming potential into actual flourishing. The river-fed garden symbolizes abundance under rational cultivation. Expulsion from Eden, therefore, frames alienation as distortion of natural teleologies. Work becomes toil, desire becomes domination, and philosophy can read Eden as a symbol of the properly ordered polis. Ecological and social justice emerge, therefore, as cosmological imperatives. Here we see the God of history, not simply the God of nature. Israel distinguishes creator from creation, rejecting naturalistic divination of sorts. Cosmology remains theological but never mythological. God acts in events, not cycles. Liberation becomes the hermeneutical key, therefore, to creation. This establishes historical teleology. The universe moves forward towards promised fulfillment rather than repeating eternal returns. Greek cosmology leans towards stasis. Biblical cosmology insists on novelty, grounding eschatological hope, and historical progress. Here we see a very close parallel between the creation story and the Exodus story. Creation and liberation share a common structural act: separation of waters. Both expresses liberation from chaos and liberation from political oppression. Land emerges for life, and land emerges as a sign of the covenant. Cosmology, therefore, cannot be divorced from ethics from this perspective. The structure of reality itself opposes domination and supports creaturely flourishing. Reasoning about nature becomes reasoning about freedom and about justice. And here we see Isaiah's interesting imagery. Isaiah appropriates mythic symbols, Rahab, sea monsters, uh, yet subordinates them to monotheistic sovereignty. Myths are not suppressed but re-signed as poetic metaphysics. Chaos imagery communicates political critique. Empire is an anti-cosmic disorder. Philosophically, Isaiah's imagery reflects symbolic cosmology. Mythic forms transmit metaphysical truths when purified of polytheism. The universe is a drama advancing toward peaceful order, not really as a permanent battleground. Here we see God's transcendence. God's absolute metaphysical priority cannot be stressed any much further. God is not a being among beings, but the very ground of being itself. Created things persist only through participation in divine causality. This introduces existential contingency. The cosmos lacks self sufficiency. Theology here interfaces with classical metaphysics, like Aquinas' Actus Essendi. Creation is continuous dependence, not past event. Cosmology thus studies a world that could collapse into nothing without divine sustainability. And here we see the polemic against idolatry at work. Idolatry confuses ontology. Treating contingent beings as absolute, Genesis corrects metaphysical errors. The cosmos is neither divine nor demonic, but willed, finite, and contingent. By freeing nature from superstition, biblical cosmology permits science. Inquiry into causes becomes permissible because nature is stable, yet not sacred. The world becomes thinkable, and philosophy thrives where idolatry diminishes. This is also the very context of Jürgen Moltmann's understanding on creation. Moltmann emphasizes bara as a verb uniquely applied to God. Creation is not merely a matter of reshaping, reforming, but a matter of calling into existence something novel. Divine freedom allows for worldhood that is radically other. And this anticipates contemporary cosmology. Emergence and spontaneity reflect divine generosity. Creation is an open system directed towards relational fulfillment, not mechanical determinism. And here we see the distinction between creating and making. Genesis distinguishes divine creation, bara, from mere crafting, asa. God creates being and also shapes being. The distinction aligns with metaphysical causality. God, as primary cause, initiates being, while creatures and natural processes are secondary causes that pursue development. This reconciles theology and science. Evolution participates in asa but is grounded by bara. While we've always spoke of creatio ex nihilo, medieval councils declared creatio ex nihilo dogma in the Lateran and also in Vatican I, finalizing metaphysical commitments. Church philosophy insists God is not constrained by pre-existing matter. This secures radical contingency and absolute divine transcendence, key foundations for philosophical cosmology and modern physical inquiry into cosmic origins. But we also need to question something that we will see all throughout in these discussions of cosmology, the question of secondary causes. Aquinas insists that denying secondary causes insults the Creator. For God made the world intelligible. Natural law is a mode of divine communication. Thus, cosmology studies instrumental causation, stars, atoms, gravity, as rational mediators of divine purpose. Science, therefore, becomes a theological vocation, reading the world of order. Here we see a shift within Greek cosmology and Christian theology. Christian cosmology engages Greek thought. Aristotle and Plato supply conceptual tools, form, matter, causality, harmonizing revelation with reason. This synthesis ensures cosmology is not mythic storytelling, but philosophical investigation. The result is a cosmic order that is both measurable and meaningful. We see the same in the wisdom literature. Sirach, Wisdom Corpus, describes stars obeying divine word. Natural law, therefore, constitutes a liturgy of creation. And this bridges mythic awe and rational order. Cosmology, therefore, becomes worshipful knowledge, and understanding laws is participation in the cosmos's praise. From here, let's shift to Plato's Timaeus. Plato's cosmology complements interestingly with Genesis by providing philosophical machinery. eternal forms, rational crafting, mathematical beauty, where Genesis narrates who creates, Plato explains how order is intelligible. Together, they form the foundation of Western metaphysical cosmology. Here we see cosmology as theology in Greece. In Greek thought, studying nature is studying the divine. The cosmos reveals the nous. This anticipates Christian natural theology. The book of nature is legible because order reflects intellect. Cosmology, therefore, becomes a form of rational theology. Here we need to see Plato's predecessors, Thales, Empedocles, Anaxagoras, and Pythagoras. Each propose elemental and mathematical explanations, seeking unity within multiplicity. Their metaphysical impulse, the cosmos, must be understandable because it is fundamentally one in order, foreshadowing scientific cosmology. But let's look at the Timaeus. The dialogical structure of the Timaeus performs philosophy as a communal inquiry. Cosmology arises from discourse, not revelation. By placing cosmology in conversation, Plato stresses intellectual humility. Cosmological accounts, therefore, are always likely stories, not certitudes. Let's look at the narrative a little bit closer. Even Plato, in the Timaeus, invokes divinity, acknowledging cosmology's limit questions. Here, at this point, metaphysics recognizes that reason ultimately depends on a transcendent grounding beyond empirical proof, a point of convergence that we see in theology. Plato's cosmology is grounded in three-tiered metaphysical ontology: eternal forms, immortal soul, and mathematical truth. Truth arises not from sensory flux, which deceives like shadows, but from intellectual contemplation of unchanging structures that precede matter. These principles imply that the universe itself is intelligible from above. Form and number precede physical expression. This elevates cosmology beyond physics. The cosmos is not just matter distributed, it is reason fully expressed. Mathematics, therefore, becomes a sacred language, not a human invention. a window into divine rationality. Therefore, the cosmologist is a kind of mystic mathematician, revealing the grammar of being. Genesis declares the world is good. Plato argues beauty arises when structure as aligns with goodness. Thus, beauty, truth, and order converge into a principle that cosmos is the same as rational harmony, a view later inherited by Christian natural theology and even modern rationalism. Plato insists that the demiurgos is good and without envy, thus willing that all existence participates in goodness. Creation, therefore, is an act of benevolent invitation. The cosmos is meant to mirror eternal perfection as far as possible. In this sense, beauty is not ornamental, but is actually proof that existence seeks purpose and unity. The world is judged aesthetically because being itself is oriented towards teleological flourishing. This frames cosmology as a type of moral philosophy. If the universe expresses divine generosity, then blotched existence and disorder call for ethical repair. Humanity becomes responsible not just to explain the cosmos, but to ensure it remains a fitting image of its source. Thus, beauty functions as a metaphysical diagnostic where harmony erodes, being is threatened. Ordered beauty, therefore, is evidence that creation is not accidental but loved. For Plato, there are three cosmological principles that articulate the mechanics of world transformation. The demiurgos is the rational cause. The eternal forms is the formal cause, while the receptacle, chaotic matter, is the material possibility. These correspond to Aristotelian categories that is later adopted by medieval philosophical teleology. Nevertheless, unlike Genesis, Plato posits stubborn matter, resisting full perfection in that case. The cosmos is therefore a contract, a compromise between intellect and necessity. Imperfection is not a moral failure, but a structural truth. The temporal world can never be fully identical to the eternal, yes. And this philosophical realism allows cosmology to explain entropy, decay, and cosmic evolution without assuming cosmic evil. The universe is good but not yet fully itself, but not yet fully itself. Here we see, so creation begins with the demiurgos. And it happens when the demiurgos fixes his gaze upon the eternal forms. This is an epistemological glance. Knowledge precedes action. The cosmos is crafted then as a reflection of metaphysical ideas and thereby insists a copy model ontology or a copying type of ontology. The world's intelligibility depends on its resemblance of transcendent truth. This concept influenced Christian thought. No? The word logos becomes the blueprint, the pattern by which the word is spoken. Creation, therefore, in this sense, thus becomes something more. It reveals intentionality, and the philosopher becomes a detective of hidden archetypes. And cosmology, therefore, becomes essentially hermeneutical. To know the heavens is to interpret the thoughts of God. Chaos, therefore, is not rival divinity, but an actualized potential waiting for the touch of form. The demiurge or the demiurgos crafts order not by conquering matter, but by persuading it towards intelligibility. And this suggests that becoming is the primary reality of the physical cosmos, a process of stabilization against dissolution. Modern cosmology preserves this drama, interestingly preserves this drama. Stars ignite by collapsing chaos into structure. Atoms stabilize through symmetry, and evolution reduces randomness through the process of adaptation. Everywhere else, the universe performs the same philosophical dance. Chaotic energy drawn toward ordered being. The cosmos, therefore, is a story of form triumphing by attraction, not by aggression. And here we see very close similarities with the Genesis text. Genesis and Timaeus converge in their depiction of cosmos as an ordered reality, yet diverged in metaphysics. diverged in metaphysics. Uh, Genesis insists creation comes from nothing, ensuring divine sovereignty. Plato assumes pre-existing chaos on the other hand, making the demiurgos a craftsman rather than a creator. But both present the cosmos as intelligible. That means as something that can be known. This difference shapes Western cosmology's two great streams. On the one hand, biblical freedom from contingency and being. On the other hand, Greek necessity and rational structure. Their synthesis yields the scientific worldview, rational order that did not have to be, inviting discovery instead of fatum. Cosmology, therefore, becomes a double certainty. The universe is both a gift, but also the universe is a grammar. When one pays attention to the Timaeus, we also recognize the presence of the world soul, the cosmic principle of life. Cosmic principle of life. Plato introduces the world soul or the concept of the world soul as the internal motion, as the cause of motion, unity, and receptivity to form. Without soul, matter remains inert, disordered, unresponsive. Soul mediates the gap between abstract universals and living particularity, something we need to pay attention to. This makes the cosmos a self-moving, self-organizing organism. While modern physics rejects literal ensoulment, the concept survives as a form of self-organizing complexity. Systems that sustain coherence against entropy. The search of laws of emergence reflects Plato's insight here. Matter wants form. Cosmology still asks and begs the question whether the universe contains immanent intelligence, a debate straddling metaphysics and even contemporary information theory. Now we need to ask, so is the universe alive? No? Alive. The world in Plato's vision, interestingly, is an is a living being that is endowed with intellect, world soul. Its elemental structure, fire, water, air, and earth, forms a singular animate unity. The proposition fundamentally reframes ontology. The cosmos is not a collection, but a community. Okay? of being, it's a community of being within one metaphysical body. This anticipates holistic paradigms, Gaia hypothesis, field theory, ecological interdependence, where identity emerges from relation. Philosophical cosmology thus refuses reductionism. The universe is more than the sum of its particles. Being is inherently ecological. Existence is relational participation in a larger organization. In this context of understanding the intelligibility of the living world, we see Plato's proportional ratios and stability. Plato argues that stability arises from geometrical proportionality, binding elements into a coherent structure. Visible being requires ordered relations, not mere substances. The cosmos is therefore a mathematical harmony before it is material form. Contemporary physics affirms this. Symmetry governs forces. Constants tune existence. Mathematics, therefore, predicts reality before instruments detect it. The philosopher asks, why should numbers rule being? Plato answers, because mind precedes matter. Cosmology without metaphysics is incomplete. We must ask why the world is not chaotic. Of course, the understanding that the world is proportional comes from a very Pythagorean source. Mean proportionals, harmony as ontology. Harmony arises when extremes are mediated, revealing that being flourishes through balanced tension. This insight becomes a metaphysical law. The universe is structured around mediating principles, bridges that unify multiplicity. Modern cosmological unification quests of forces, particles, symmetries extend this Platonic vision. The cosmos demands coherence, seeking ever more integrated laws. Philosophers detect purpose in this pursuit. Reality is teleologically attracted to unity. Mediation is not accidental, but ontologically required. So we see how extremes are mediated, therefore. Now let's look at from surface to the concept of space. Three-dimensional solids require two mediating means for harmony. Greater complexity demands richer relational structure. This perspective anticipates higher dimensional cosmologies like space-time curvature, multidimensional string theory, and non-Euclidean cosmic topology. The cosmos does not merely have space. Space have intelligence. Dimensional order serving as a metaphysical foundation of structure and motion. Dimensionality becomes a philosophical question. Why this geometry? Why this number of dimensions? Here we see at play the role of the Platonic solids. Each element is represented by a unique polyhedron. Matter is shape and number. Form becomes physics. Fire rises because its shape is sharp. Earth settles because cube faces align in stability. Though scientifically outdated, this expresses a profound intuition. Structure determines behavior. Modern crystallography, quantum states, and particle symmetries retain the core insight. Geometry undergirds reality. Plato's solids become early metaphors for mathematical ontology, and that's very important at this point. Harmonious bonding of elements. Transitions between elements show nature as continuous order, not as isolated substances. Cosmos is relational. Ratios unify differences. And the universe is architecture, not accident. Take note, since a while ago, we've been connecting Plato with contemporary astrophysics. Similarly, today's physics still seeks a single symmetry from which all particle and force behaviors emerge. As Plato suggests, the deepest unity lies in mathematical relation. Without proportion, no stability. Without stability, no being. Bonding, therefore, is the metaphysical heartbeat of the universe. Another interesting insight is how transformations happen. Elements shift into one another. Becoming, therefore, is central. Plato anticipates thermodynamics, alchemy, and modern particle physics. Matter is fluid, dynamic, convertible. This provides philosophy a key axiom. Impermanence is not deficiency, but progression. The cosmos is unfinished, always moving towards greater order. Creation is not a moment, but a cosmic project, continually advancing from potentiality into actuality. Here we see the musical construction of the world. The demiurgos composes reality like music, octaves, intervals, and vibrations encode the unity of the same and the other. Harmony, therefore, becomes the physics of being. Modern cosmology echoes this clearly. Quantum physics prescribes particles as vibrations. String theory models the universe as resonating strings. Harmonic analysis defines space-time energy, and it states that science recovers the ancient conviction that the universe sings and harmony reveals truth. Here we see the blending of the same and the other. The soul fuses identity sameness with multiplicity, otherness, ensuring that a plural universe remains one. Without this synthesis, existence would fragment into unrelated flux. Uh, this metaphysical tension persists in cosmology. Unity, diversity, or unity versus diversity, order versus entropy, determinism versus freedom. The cosmos is intelligible because it holds these forces together without collapsing either pole. Philosophy calls these relational ontology. Being occurs only in communion. And lastly, the divine proportions. Plato concludes with a vision of this cosmic symphony, number and proportion shaping every movement of the heavens. The celestial order is not merely mechanical, but harmonically intentional. Contemporary cosmology returns precisely here. Rhythmic cosmic microwave background, orbital resonance among moons and planets, harmonic field interactions in quantum physics. As Pythagoras hinted, the universe is number in motion. Philosophy reads these as evidence of logos. The rational melody underlies existence. The cosmos is intelligible because it is composed. So dark, sorry. Let me put light on myself first. They're better. To end, as we come to the end of this journey through Genesis, Plato, and the vast questions of cosmology, it's worth pausing to notice what has quietly happened to us along the way. We began with stories of beginnings, a God who speaks light into existence, a demiurgos who shapes chaos with mathematics and care. We trace the language of forms and elements, of world souls and musical ratios, of void and void's undoing. But underneath all of that technical vocabulary sits something profoundly simple and disarming. The conviction that the universe is not absurd. It is intelligible. It is, in its own way, hospitable to mind and meaning. Just the fact that we can study it, that equations can describe it, that narratives can interpret it, that wonder can rise up in us when we look at the night sky, this already places us inside a story larger than ours. Cosmology then is never just about stars, atoms, and early moments about the Big Bang or after the Big Bang. It is also about us, about what kind of beings we must be to even ask these questions. And both Genesis and Plato, in their very idioms, suggest that the human person is not an accidental spectator, but a participant, a creature who can read the world and in reading it respond. If the cosmos is an ordered harmony, then every act of genuine thinking, every moment of awe, every quiet why, whispered under the stars is already a way of joining that harmony. Our study has sharpened our tools and deepened our concepts. But it has also been an invitation to humility, to recognize that the more we understand, the more we stand before a mystery that does not shrink under analysis, but becomes more luminous. So, as we begin this course, I hope you carry more than definitions and diagrams. I hope you carry a renewed sense of gratitude, that you live in a world that can be loved with the mind as well as with the heart. I hope you remember that arguments about creation and cosmology are not isolated puzzles, but part of a larger human effort to say, these all matters. It is coherent. It is some deep way, or it is in some deep way good. And I hope that when you next look up at the sky or sit quietly with a problem set or listen to someone tell their own story of origin and hope, you feel a gentle echo of what we have explored together. That behind all motion and matter, behind the equations and myths, there's a call to wisdom, to responsibility, and to wonder. If these have given you even slightly different way of seeing the world, this first lecture, understanding it a little more patient, a little more curious, a little more reverent, then this session has done its work. The questions will of course continue. They always do, but perhaps now you can let them accompany you not as burdens, but as companions. Reminders that you belong to a universe that is astonishingly intelligible enough to study and mysterious enough to never grow old. And that is, in itself, a very beautiful place to begin. Thank you for listening, everyone.